you had people, lots of my followers talk about this, 100 people deep, shoulder to shoulder in a Costco or a Walmart. But, your small business, you couldn't step into even on a one-off basis. And so we weren't all in it together. We didn't have full lockdowns. And then the, important piece of this is that if you were going to tell a certain group of people, well, you can't operate, you need to compensate them for subjugating their property rights for the good of society, eminent domain, as the Constitution calls it. And that didn't happen either. So you didn't have full lockdowns, you didn't have full liberty, you didn't have full compensation. You just had a picking of winners and losers, not based on data and science, but based on political clout and connections.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Jeremy Kersten Show. Today, we're going to be sharing the interview that I did with Carol Roth. This was one of my favorite interviews to do. If you don't know who Carol Roth is, she is a former investment banker. You can see her on CNBC, CNN, Fox News, Fox Business, pretty much almost daily, it seems like, giving her 2 cents on the economy, the job market, and just other things in the financial sector. I love Carol. She is such an amazing, smart, articulate American patriot who is all pro-business, pro-small business, and just loves this country, loves to see people create wealth for themselves. She recently wrote a book called The War on Small Business, How the U.S. Government Used the Pandemic to Crush the Backbone of America. We're going to be talking to her about that book today. If at any point you do want to subscribe, that would be awesome. Smash that subscribe button. Hit the thumbs up if you enjoy the interview. Leave your questions that you've got, from maybe Carol or myself down in the comments below. Let me know what you thought of the interview in the comments below. And with all that being said, guys, let's go ahead and get into the interview. Carol, thank you so much for coming on to the Jeremy Kersten Show today.
I'm so excited to be here and been looking forward to the discussion.
Could you give us a little bit of a background about who you are and what you currently do?
Sure. So I am a recovering investment banker. I play myself on television, and I am the author of The War on Small Business. Feel like that sort of encompasses, probably begets a lot of questions, but gives you enough of a high level to say, I do a lot of different things.
Right. So your first book was about small business and the small business owner and the struggle of opening a business, correct?
Yeah, so the first book I wrote, which was about a decade ago, is called The Entrepreneur Equation, and it came out of my frustration with people giving really bad advice to small business owners. It's very difficult to risk your own capital, your time, your focus, your blood, your sweat, your tears, your heart, your soul, and put it into something. And so many small business owners don't really succeed at the level that they perhaps should. But it's still an opportunity for them to pursue economic freedom. And so I wanted to create a roadmap to make sure that the right people were pursuing the right opportunities at the right time, and just be really candid about all of the risks that it took to run a small business. And at the time, while I certainly knew that the government was never sort of helping out small businesses at the level that they should, never did I ever think that the number one risk to a small business owner in the United States of America would be the government coming in, shutting them down for months and months, in some cases more than a year, and saying you cannot be in business. That never crossed my mind. So it was a very stark reality sort of going into this new endeavor.
Yeah, I mean, that was completely unprecedented. I don't think anybody expected that. I want to help paint a picture to anyone who's not familiar with the typical small business owner. And I want to hear it from you of kind of like describe who that person is and what are they dealing with before the pandemic.
Yeah, so first of all, 99.9% of all business entities and about half the GDP and about half the jobs in this country come from small business. So I think that a lot of people think about small as niche, and it's not. It's half the economy and it's most of the entities, as I said, 30.2 million. And so in many ways, there isn't a typical small business owner, which makes it so difficult because they're across every industry, they're across every size. They're across different geographies. They have different focuses. Some people are looking to maximize their profits. Some people are pursuing flexibility or passions. What I can tell you is that before COVID, 24.2 million of the 30.2 million approximately were solo entrepreneurs, so businesses that had no employees, and about 6 million of them did have employees. And I want to contrast that to the other half of the economy, which is the big businesses. And depending on how you categorize them, there's about 10 to 15,000 big businesses. So 10 to 15,000 versus 6 million with employees and 24.2 without employees. It's a huge chasm between the two. And you can really then kind of, if you visualize that, see the concentration that's happening on the big business side. But your small business could be anything from your local dry cleaner, hair salon, nail salon. It could be somebody who's servicing people at trade shows. It could be a food truck. It could be, really anything. And as we know, it is that sort of way to get in the game and to own something and to create wealth for yourself. And all of the big businesses, with perhaps an exception here or there from a spinoff, they all started out as small businesses, and some of them grew up to be those biggest businesses that we have today.
Yeah, absolutely. Where does your passion for small business and economics come from?
So I'm in a unique position. Well, actually, it's probably not even that unique, but I'm in a privileged position because neither of my parents went to college. My dad was an electrician, and I saw the opportunities that were created and available in this country via capitalism, and how anyone, even somebody with my background, could go and pursue something and have incredible economic success. I coupled that with, as I said, first person in my family going to college. I went to Wharton undergrad, so I studied economics and finance at Wharton and went into investment banking, as I mentioned, to start my career. And I've always had an interest in entrepreneurship and markets and those kinds of things. But the small business piece really came in as an investment banker when I would get calls from small business owners who really wanted to get some good advice, but they couldn't afford to pay the retainer fee, let alone the full fee of a full service investment bank. And I thought to myself, there's got to be a way to leverage media, and this was like at the very early part of social media, to be able to give information, advice, more of that expert knowledge base to small business owners at scale, and not have to have them worry about, can I pay this retainer fee? So that was kind of that. But I believe, those who have benefited from capitalism and who have that abundance mentality should be spreading the word and should be encouraging everybody else to succeed and to give them that boost. Because if you tell people they can and you show them the path, then they're going to do that. If you tell them that they're a victim and there's only so much out there for everyone, then that's how they're going to behave, and you're going to have a different set of outcomes. So I see no downside and only upside in pursuing the former.
Right. We're going to get to capitalism a little bit more in a minute, but first let's just get right into the lockdowns. And I guess, how did the US government fail at the very beginning of this entire rollout, like in the days of January, February, March, leading up to, the larger crashes of everything?
Yeah, so this was the strategy to say, can we stop the virus from coming here, right? So that was, at that point, it wasn't widely known that it was here and spread around. I think a couple things that they dropped the ball on is just not taking serious the potential for a threat and assuming that China was going to be straight up with us. And the reality of that is that there are some senators and the like that kind of raised a red flag, and it was somewhat ignored. I, as you know, attribute that in the book is to it coincided to the signing of this trade agreement, this first phase of a trade agreement with China. So I think that put a little bit of blinders on us wanting to then all of a sudden rock the boat with China. And then there were a bunch of really stupid things that were done. One was these emergency use authorizations for testing, which they thought was going to speed up the process of getting COVID tests out, but ended up creating all of these new barriers. And so somebody like South Korea that went to the private market and said, we're going to basically need your help and you're going to get us into this game. They were able to get it out really quickly and test people really quickly, while it took us 6 extra weeks or 8 extra weeks because of all of this ridiculous paperwork. So that was like a huge dropping of the ball. Another big dropping of the ball early on was the fact that we, via the State Department, shepherded a bunch of companies to send our protective equipment to China. So everything from masks to ventilators to whatnot, rounded up all the companies and said, oh, look at us, we're going to be so generous, and sent them to China instead of starting to build that stockpile here in the United States. And then, of course, the messaging was one of the worst pieces early on, which were things like masks. And if you go back, and it's really crazy because I kind of lay out a couple of the data points, is that we had everybody from the Director of Health and Human Services and the U.S. Surgeon General to Dr. Fauci telling us not to wear masks. And the media was running cover on that and saying, don't do it, to the extent that they actually said in some cases that it would be dangerous for you. NBC News had an article making fun of President Trump, saying, oh, he would get caught up on these small things like wearing masks, ha, 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 like what an idiot, while his advisors, told him not to. And then they quoted him as saying something along the lines of, well, I don't understand. Why do doctors wear them if they don't work? And you can just hear him saying that, and NBC News is poking fun. And then obviously we know that a few weeks later, everybody completely changed the messaging, even though no science had changed. So there were just so many things that were done in terms of messaging, in terms of buy-in, in terms of empowering individuals who were already going out and trying to do preparations on their own and telling them they were being idiots, that should have been done differently, that perhaps would have shifted at least that maybe we wouldn't have gotten it. But the reality is, given what we know now, is they probably would have come here anyway. So maybe we would just been a little bit more prepared and had better data early on. But even as we did get that data, it was ignored. I mean, we knew based on the data that we had out of China that this was something that primarily affected the elderly. Yet we saw the decisions that New York made and ultimately lied about that impacted how other states ended up moving forward with their lockdowns and the like, as well as the ridiculously stupid plan, which, by the way, came out of the federal government and the Trump administration, which was 15 days to slow the spread. And even though that was implemented at the state level, they're the ones who provided that language and that blueprint. And that was just obviously an epic disaster.
That's a good kind of segue into the next question, which is do you think that it was ultimately fear that pushed businesses to close their doors and send workers home? And was it fear of the virus or fear of retaliation for not obeying these orders?
Yeah, I think it depends on the business. I think certainly if you look at the early orders, so the first ones to kind of do anything were Ohio and Mike DeWine and his, I think her name was Dr. Amy Acton, who were the first ones. And they basically took the general macro guidelines that the 15 days to slow the spread put out and said, okay, well, we're just going to kind of roll with that. And we're going to go. And if you're a restaurant or a gym or, some sort of a gathering place, like we're going to shut you down first. So I think in those cases, those businesses didn't have a choice in the matter. I think some of the bigger businesses who have more access to capital and more flexibility did shut down just because they weren't sure what was happening. But a lot of those reopened. Like you saw things like big box pet stores who maybe closed down for a week or two reopen. And that just goes to show where the hypocrisy is. Like you could get your dog's nails groomed or your dog's haircut, but you couldn't get your own nails groomed or your own haircut. You had weed dispensaries that weren't even legal, years before, all of a sudden, that were labeled essential. So I think that most of what happened, even if it wasn't kind of in the first week or two, but long term, was really by mandate. And anybody who didn't then throw up their hands and go, forget about this, I'm not doing this, they were worried because they saw small business owners thrown in jail. They saw people getting fined. And then certainly, with the messaging that was going on to their employees and to their customers, that didn't help the scenario either. That's kind of the indirect mandate, against the small businesses. But, you had people, lots of my followers talk about this, 100 people deep, shoulder to shoulder in a Costco or a Walmart. But, your small business, you couldn't step into even on a one-off basis. And so we weren't all in it together. We didn't have full lockdowns. And then the, important piece of this is that if you were going to tell a certain group of people, well, you can't operate, you need to compensate them for subjugating their property rights for the good of society, eminent domain, as the Constitution calls it. And that didn't happen either. So you didn't have full lockdowns, you didn't have full liberty, you didn't have full compensation. You just had a picking of winners and losers, not based on data and science, but based on political clout and connections.
We'll go ahead and get into capitalism now. And thank you for that answer there. But so can you describe what free market capitalism should be, and kind of what version of capitalism are we in now? Because, and as you wrote in your book, we're moving towards the China model, and this whole the idea of free market capitalism has been changed.
Yeah, so I would basically think of like a spectrum, which basically is sort of who's making the decisions on things and how are they making those decisions. So one end of the spectrum, you have freedom, you have choice, you have transparency, and that's free market capitalism. That's all it is, basically with guardrails of property rights, because you can't have those things if you don't have property rights. But basically that's all it is. It's not even a system. It's just us doing what we do. We make decisions that puts feedback back into the market, and the market adjusts, based on supply, demand, all those kinds of economic factors. And so that's what free market capitalism is. There are areas and pockets of things that look very much like that, but as a widespread system, we're not there. And so, as you move away from that, you move towards what I call central planning. And I don't like to get caught up in socialism versus communism versus democratic socialism, because I don't think it's helpful. I think the underlying concept is helpful. So the concept is central planning is with a handful of people who are making decisions on behalf of everybody, and they're using force, they're using control, they're using coercion, and it's fairly opaque. So those are your two ends of the spectrum. As you move closer to one, you're closer to free market capitalism. As you move closer to the other, you're closer to central planning. And so there is no version of, and that's like this whole like versions of capitalism thing that people talk, late stage cap, like, no, it's just, there's no version of freedom, choice, and transparency. It is what it is. It's just how close or how far away from are we. And I will contend that we've been moving further away from it. And that's the problem. We are moving closer to a model that looks like the UK or France, best case, worst case, Venezuela or Cuba. And that is with those handful of people making the decisions. And if you don't believe me, you say, well, that's not possible. Look at all these companies. Well, the reality is, look at what the government is in charge of. I mean, they make capital decisions at all levels. Before COVID, of $8.1 trillion a year, they're sitting on top of tens of thousands of laws at the federal level, more than 1 million at the state levels. Their purview has increased. We spend more than any other country, with the exception of 2 like tiny countries, like Luxembourg is one, and I don't remember who the other is, on our education system. We spend a ton on healthcare. We've nationalized the college lending in large parts. So like, what part of that doesn't look like central planning, or whatever name you want to attribute it to, or attribute to it? And that's the issue, is that we're moving away from the economic freedom and the free choice to people making the decisions. And we know, because we've got all of the data throughout all of history everywhere in the world, that does not work as well as when you have things that are decentralized and look more like a free market.
Yeah, and on that note of free market, I agree with what you were talking about with the the minimum wage laws, that basically there shouldn't be one, because if as you kind of put it, and I'm paraphrasing probably a little bit, no one's forcing you to take the job. It's an agreement between an employer and employee, and if you don't want to take it, then go find something else. My answer to it is improve your skill set, because we should be getting paid for the value that we bring to a company, instead of just a mandated number that they make up that thinks that it's best for all, when really minimum wage laws hurt more business growth than anything else. So kind of on that note of income, can you tell us, why doesn't UBI, or universal basic income, work?
Well, let me ask you this. If I said, Jeremy, give me $1 and I will guarantee you at the end of the year, I'll give you back 75 cents, would you give me your $1?
No.
But I guaranteed you I'm giving you 75 cents. It's universal basic income. Don't you think that's a good idea?
Oh, no.
No, of course not, right? Because we're paying, it's our money. So like, if you have money, why would you give it to a middleman to give it back to you? Like, it's never going to come back with more money. Like, that's just not a thing, right? It's not like they're like taking that money, investing it into something productive, and like you're getting a benefit back. They're just a middleman who's moving stuff around. So like the fact that anybody thinks this is a good idea makes sense. If you make money and you have money, you wouldn't give it to somebody else to give it back. And you certainly don't want to pay more for goods and services and create fewer efficiencies because of value added taxes in the market and things like that. If you're somebody who's struggling, well, we have poverty programs to deal with poverty, and those are horrible and need to be fixed and should be focused on people creating wealth, not keeping them on the government dole. But like, that's a separate program. And frankly, we have dozens of those. So that's not universal, that's poverty. So like, I fundamentally can't even understand why anybody would argue. And I think we can see, based on what happened in the last 16 months, it's not like people who got government stimulus checks all of a sudden were like creating all of this art like we told was going to be happening if people could get this guarantee from the government. But you don't want the government to have more purview. You don't ever want to promise anyone a benefit, because that requires actuarial guessing that never works out in anyone's favor, and you just don't need a middleman to hand your money back to you. So in terms of shrinking the government and letting you keep, if you want more of your money, like, don't put the government in the middle of it. And if you want more wealth creation opportunities, I've never ever heard a politician talk about wealth creation opportunities.
Right. What is one of the most ridiculous examples of freedoms that was just trampled on and ignored during the pandemic? I mean, I'm sure you have a ton of them, but what are some of the better ones?
Yeah, I think the throwing small business owners in jail or fining them millions of dollars for working when they weren't appropriately compensated. I mean, there's nothing more ridiculous, in my opinion, than that. I fundamentally don't understand it. These were not laws. These were mandates, sometimes made by executive order, where the person making them didn't have the authority to do so. And certainly they were not constitutional. So to take away my property for the public good, not compensate me and then penalize me for that. I mean, that is the ultimate in subjugation of rights. And frankly, I've told many small business owners that they should sue if they have sustained damages and they did not get compensated to the level that they should have for the subjugation of their property rights, that they should be suing, whatever entities were the ones that shut them down. Because it just isn't right. And the bad part about that is it's still a lose-lose situation, because again, the government doesn't have any productive capacity. So it's just our money that ends up getting reshuffled to that. But we can't have that stuff happening.
Right. You talk a lot about decentralization. So that kind of made me think about currencies, cryptocurrencies. What's your opinion on cryptocurrencies and, Bitcoin or whatever being a decentralized currency for, I don't know, either the US or the world or what have you?
Yeah, so I'm fascinated by cryptocurrency, and I completely agree with the thesis and why so many people, have moved towards it, because it is pushback against what the Federal Reserve has done in terms of destroying risk in our system, destroying the value of the US dollar and transferring wealth from Main Street to Wall Street. So I think the thesis is very sound from that perspective. The challenge that we have is that it is a fight against central power. So we do have a market that's denominated in dollars. We do have an IRS that collects fees in dollars. And then just in terms of, whatever cryptocurrency, whether it's Bitcoin or otherwise, in terms of an actual currency, a currency is usually, or money is considered a unit of account, a medium of exchange, and or a store of value. And, in terms of being a unit of account, nobody's talking about anything in terms of Bitcoins yet. It's still, everything's denominated in dollars. So we're not at that point. A medium of exchange is still very clunky. Us old folks, it takes us a while to figure out how to do the Bitcoin exchange. So it's not widespread yet. And in terms of the volatility, it's still nascent. So we don't know, where it stands in terms of it being sort of a stable store of value, because the price is moving so much. So I kind of have been looking at it more as an alternative asset class, as maybe sort of like a digital version of gold, or even as like a collectible asset class, like kind of like an art or a wine, because all of these things, if you think about it, are just a social contract. Gold has had the longest social contract since the beginning of time. People have said there's value in gold, and certainly people like it to adorn themselves, and it has some other uses, although I would say, and others have kind of characterized its useful value as probably maybe a tenth or less of its overall market cap. So that it's not really, there is some sort of social contract that's inflating gold versus its just kind of fundamental value. But art, why is a Jackson Pollock worth millions of dollars, and me splatter painting, worth nothing? Why are certain wines worth more? It's all a social contract. So it's about people coming together to ascribe value to something. And I think it is very possible that over longer periods of time that we will see, whether it's Bitcoin or something that maybe hasn't even been invented yet, that we just all agree that we're going to have, this other store of value, this other asset. And we're in the early innings of that. So I think that will evolve. But today it remains highly speculative. Today it remains alternative. And so I think it's interesting to learn about. And I think if you invest in it, it's good to treat it as you would any other investment in an alternative asset class, in terms of how much of your portfolio you would put towards it.
Yeah. What inspired you to write this latest book? Did you just get fed up seeing what was happening?
So I was actually approached to write the book.
Really?
I was approached very early on in the pandemic by HarperCollins, who wanted a takeaway. They said, this is going to be a historic economic event, and we want somebody to capture it. And so I didn't know what the book was going in. It wasn't that there was a thesis and I was setting out to try and prove the thesis. I was taking in the information real time and saying, what has happened here? And so as you can imagine, stuff was unfolding, stuff was changing. then stuff would come out about what had happened, via investigative journalists, months after. So I actually kind of wrote 3.5 different books during the course of the pandemic, but this small business piece was always a big piece of it, because from day one, even like right before the CARES Act was written, I had written an op-ed about like how you should structure the CARES Act to keep people working and to keep businesses in business, but they could just stay home and work, and it would have been a fraction of the overall dollar spent. And I talk about this in the book. And so I knew that a lot of this was going to be shouldered by small business. But then when I started like putting all the pieces together and looking at the decisions that were made and looking at the data and science and lack thereof, and looking at what happened with the Federal Reserve and all of these different pieces and the wealth transfer, and you end the year and you see that like 7 technology companies gained $3.4 trillion in value over the course of a year, and it was a record year for initial public offerings. Like at the same time that 400,000 small businesses at a minimum had been murdered and millions more were struggling to survive, you start to see this is the story. And it is the most underreported story of the last 16 months. And so I'm trying to get out ahead of it, because already you're seeing the media and government officials trying to rewrite this story and say, no, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't, the economy is fantastic, and using the stock market and certain other things to deflect from that. And so having this, very accurate account of what had happened, I think is going to become more and more important as time goes on.
Yeah. Well, you definitely did an excellent job in laying out, kind of almost, it feels like daily what was happening and unfolding throughout the pandemic from the beginning all the way up until, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like your research ends around December of 2020. Is that about correct?
Generally speaking, there are a few things I think that kind of like that we were able to draw in kind of early in 2021. But I think, I was done proofreading kind of end of February, beginning of March.
Yeah. And there's a lot of different topics that we just don't have time to get into today. Kind of like you were talking about the consolidation of power into these larger companies, versus, crushing the small ones, which is primarily what the bulk of this book is about. So thank you so much for writing it. And I think it's a wealth of information for anyone who just sort of wants to understand, like you said, the backbone of this country and small business, and also understand what exactly unfolded, what took place, how it impacted small business. So excellent job on writing it.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for being a small business warrior. And I would just encourage everyone to get educated about this, because it affects the wealth creation opportunities for everybody in this country, which basically is the foundation of our economic freedom. And we are at that crossroads. We're either pull it back and preserve these opportunities, or we're going to end up, like one of these kind of quasi central planning or full central planning countries. And none of us wants that.
Yeah. Carol, I've got a couple of fun questions for you. On Twitter, you have a lot of 80s nostalgia tweets. Yes. I love it.
Now, and I brought my big hair for you because it is Friday as we're recording.
Yep. That was the big one. I was going to ask, where did the big hair Friday thing start?
Okay, so this is how it started. It's very random. Is that I do TV weekly, and there used to be a show which is not on the air anymore. That I had a standing appointment on that I did every Friday. And so my hair always looked really nice on Fridays, because I knew whatever other shows I was on during the week, I was almost always on a Friday. So like one day I was like, oh, it's Friday. Like my hair is wishing you a happy weekend, just as like a joke. And people started to like love it. And they'd be like, well, it's Friday. Like, where's the hair picture? And I'm like, oh, this is a thing? Like, I didn't know it was a thing. And then Cobra Commander 15 came up with the hashtag laissez hair, because I was tweeting about big hair, small government, which I joke is like my political affiliation. So it just became this like monster where like I did it once or twice, like, oh, it's Friday, look at my hair's nice. And it just became this thing. So then I like turned it into, oh, hey, well, this is a way for me to teach people about capitalism. So Friday Hair Day is sponsored by capitalism. And I give you some sort of nugget about, economic freedom and free markets and socialism and, all those kinds of things. And so it's like, as I said, it's this bizarre thing. And if I don't do it, Jeremy, like people literally freak, like it's Friday, where's the hair day? It's taken on a life of its own. So like, I don't do it for me. Like, I wish I could never have to do it again. Cause it's a lot of like, I'm not like, I don't like to take pictures. I'm really lazy, but it's a thing. So that's awesome. How Friday Hair Day came to be.
I love it. I think it's pretty funny, and it's part of the brand. So yeah, it's got to stay, Carol.
All right. Fair enough.
Well, anything you want to add real quick?
No, I mean, again, I thank you. And then, the only kind of fun thing that I've been telling people who want to buy The War on Small Business for themselves, for their friends, for young people, it's been great getting great feedback from young folks, which is fantastic. Lots of optimism for the future. Is that, if you don't want to support the big guys, you can go to bookshop.org and they will actually fulfill the purchase through a local small business bookstore. So it's a really good way if you like to shop online and don't have the time to run into your local bookstore. You can go to this online aggregator, bookshop.org, and it'll show you how much is going to support your local bookstore, which is really cool.
Yeah, very cool. Well, aside from Twitter, where can people find you?
Honestly, that's the best place, at Carol J.S. Roth on Twitter. I spend most of my time there. I do have a website that's like 10 years out of date called carolroth.com. You can reach me through the contact form there, but like there's nothing really that interesting on there unless, you want to check out our blog or, whatever it is. But usually Twitter, like if you're on Twitter, you'll get all the links to the relevant places and stay informed on what's going on.
Awesome. Well, guys, once again, the book is The War on Small Business, How the Government Used the Pandemic to Crush the Backbone of America. Carol, thank you so much for being a guest today on the Jeremy Kersten Show, and I hope that we can talk again soon.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks for your support of small business, small government, and big hair.
Take care. Well, that sums it up, guys. Thank you so much for watching this interview with Carol Roth. Again, this was my favorite interview to do so far. I think this is a lot of important information here. It's a ton of history lessons that need to be shared throughout the world, in fact, and I don't know. I just can't say enough. It was just so awesome. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below. If you haven't already, smash the subscribe button. Share this with a friend. Hit those notification bells so you'll be notified each time we upload a new episode. And also hit the thumbs up because it helps share this video, or helps get this video out rather, to more people. And I guess that's about it, guys. And until next time, take care. Also, if you want to check out any of my other episodes, I'll put a link to one of them over here and one of them over here. Or you just click on my face right there, and I believe that hit subscribe, right? Yeah, I don't know. Something, whatever. See you guys next time. Okay, that's it.